Waiting for spring to get here.
Tomorrow, it'll be here tomorrow.
So we can have our winter weather in springtime.
Yes, exactly.
Well, yeah, too.
I got a paper.
Yeah, I see it.
Thank you. January. Look at that.
Oh, no, I missed the bag. I was supposed to be getting ready to play the bag.
You should be.
I was going to say, if he did.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready?
Ready.
All right. Welcome to First Universalist of New Madison on this frosty last day of winter. Seems like we skipped winter for February and they just decided to give us a jolt last end of March here. 19 degrees, snow yesterday. Pretty frosty out there. So, do we have any announcements?
As I recall, we scheduled, well, obviously next Sunday, we have a couple things going on. Was it my understanding that in order to prepare for the April 2nd Union service with El Dorado, were we going to actually clean next Sunday, or did you want to do another day, or you want to think about that? I thought we had both things, cleaning and the movie, scheduled for next Sunday, and I got to thinking, you really want to do that? It's so fine, but there's a Saturday there as well we could do on the 25th, so, or the Saturday before the Sunday on April 2nd, if you'd rather clean then. But we'll probably need to do a little cleaning, sprucing up before our guests come in from El Dorado.
Next Sunday is going to be the Holocaust. We're going to do the Ken Burns, the series of 3. We're probably not going to do all 3. We're going to do it right after church, so 11:15, 11:30. And we discussed before, we always had pizza, but that means going down in the basement, lighting the ovens, waiting 25 minutes. So what I think I'm going to do is we'll get a couple toaster ovens and we'll have like finger food for snacks. And
Bring our own lunch.
or bring your own lunch if you want, and soda, and we may have beer. We'll see.
So is it...
But then we thought we would clean either if there's nobody here or hardly anybody here, we can actually clean at the same time, because you just like at home, I watch TV and dust and clean, you know.
It's fine with me. I was just throwing the option out that if you want to do it, you know, if that's too much for one Sunday, we can do it another time. So
the only thing that would interfere is trying to run the sweeper, you know, while we were, when the movie was on, so that may have to wait.
Okay, well, let's think about it and let's chat about it during the coffee hour today then. And specifically cleaning. Otherwise, we're still on with our hosting El Dorado congregation on April 2nd, Palm Sunday. And I know we have a sign-up sheet for the food. And so we'll talk more. Thank you.
Yes, April 2nd, that'll be the combination service with El Dorado, and Derek will preach. And then we'll have the carry-in afterwards, and most of that is pretty well set up. We're going to bring tables up, which we did before. We'll have them set up in a U. It worked real good the last time, so I think we'll be fine with that.
And if I may also add, El Dorado is having their Easter fair as they traditionally do this year. However, they're not having the dinner that they've had historically. They are selling a ham loaf, and there will be other things. And so I will bring information on that, but just kind of set that aside. I think the ham loaf is a full pound for maybe $12. They make great ham loaf, as we know from the past. And they're not having the dinner, but I believe they still are having the fair. And I'll bring information for you next Sunday.
Okay.
I think it's the ham loaf.
I think it's, I don't know. I'll look up, but I think it was like they're selling it by the pound, I believe.
It's a fundraiser.
It's a pretty good size, Danny. No, it's only a pound. It's a pound?
There's lots of air in it.
Pound, 12 pound.
Yeah. Yeah, it's $12 a pound.
Oh,
It's not a 12-pound
It's like
loaf.
taking it to the grocery.
Okay, we'll clarify that. We don't want the Alvarado congregation to be deluged from internet traffic, online, and love.
Thank you.
And we want to, if in the interest of future relations, we want to maintain a relationship with El Dorado and build on that as much as we can.
Indeed.
Hence, we will support them in whatever they do, and hopefully they will come and be a part of what we do. Any other announcements? Can't think of anything. All right, the prelude, I will rise and go to Jesus.
I want to tell you just a bit about that. This is my sister, Betty Lou's book, and Betty Lou plays much better piano than I do, but she gave me some of her books. And this piece I found, it's called I Will Arise and Go to Jesus. So I tried to find that, it's supposed to be a hymn, and I tried to find it in my hymnals I have, and I couldn't find it. So you can think about the words as we go along. I will arise and go to Jesus. It's a Southern folk melody, it says, and I just loved it when I started playing it, so I hope it goes in.
Very nice. Praise the blessings of music. All right, something that I missed on announcements. Margaret hasn't been here for 2 or 3 weeks and kind of wondering what's going on there. So I got a card for Margaret. I know they had trouble with COVID, she and Patrick. So we'll send her another card, just let her know that we're thinking about her. And then, if you can see by what we're doing, we talked last week about woke. And we're going to talk a little more about woke this week, only we're going to talk about it from the attitude or from the perspective of wake up. Woke has gotten a bad name, as I'm sure you're aware, with all of the conservatives talking about people being, how terrible it is to be woke and how they're passing laws against wokeism and et cetera, et cetera. So, because we don't accept that, or I don't accept that, wake up America, don't be asleep at the switch. Woke actually means something good. It started out meaning something good, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go along. Okay, Chalice Lighting is by Eric Walker Wickstrom. As we approach our gathering time, let us remember that we are doing the work of the congregation. When we do the work of this congregation, we touch lives. When we touch lives, we change the world. May this chalice flame we now kindle remind us throughout our meeting today of our ministry and our mission. Opening hymn is number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door. Admittedly, I can't sing, but that one seems like exceptionally difficult. Interesting lyrics, though, with laughter drown the raucous shout, and although these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in. I think we can all support that. All right, our affirmation: approaching another people, another culture, another religion is to take off our shoes. For the place we are approaching is holy, else we may find ourselves treading on people's dreams. More seriously still, we may forget that God was here before our arrival. Kind of sideways entrance into being woke. Our first task in approaching other people is to be aware of other people's desires, their hopes, their dreams, and try not to walk on their dreams. All right, I almost forgot. Lots of things going on this time of the year. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. We don't want to forget St. Patrick's Day. Came up, sorry. And we missed that, so we've got Guinness, we've got 7 lucky facts of being Irish, just a little bit of the whole Irish thing. So I didn't want to like totally bypass that. And we'll go to that. And this is our children's story. Remember I've talked to you about Gary Burbank and WLR? Are you anybody aware of Gary Burbank?
Oh, yeah.
Earl Pitts?
Earl Pitts.
Earl Pitts is a little raw sometimes, but I think you'll get a kick out of it.
Is he still on WOW?
No. Gary had his own TV show for a short time.
You know what makes me sick? You know what makes me sick? I was gonna lick the creamy-looking white crud off a corroded battery terminal. Went down to Duck Inn last night. The beer was flowing and the talk was getting a little loud. You know when you're getting a bunch of boys together at a bar, you know what talk's gonna turn into, do you? Bunch of guys drinking in a bar. The Bible. We come up with a rock-solid fact of the Bible most people don't even know. Get this. God is a redneck. Now, I ain't worried about getting swallowed up by hail or struck by lightning saying that day, because to my way of thinking, being a redneck is the greatest compliment you could give somebody, even the all-know supreme somebody. But now hear me out. God invented Adam. Where'd he put him? In a beachfront condo? No. Some yuppie-built East Side Central Park apartment? No. God put Adam in the woods. God invented camping. And then God wants to destroy the world. He tells Noah to save himself. Does he tell Noah to build some yuppie 4-wheel drive sport utility vehicle? Nope. Big old airplane? Nope. Noah builds a giant houseboat. God invented houseboat. And then God sends his only known son down to earth to straighten things out. Now, does God make his son a middle management guy? No. A software developer? No. Business consultant? No. A stock market analyst? Sure. God made his son a carpenter, a union guy. And who's he hang out with? Bunch of fishermen. And how about all them Jewish people out there in the desert with Moses? God fed them people every day by America. Bible said crispy flakes of flour was on the ground when they woke up. Sound like nacho to me. And where there's nacho, bear couldn't be too far away. Wake up, America! One last thing, you hear thunder and lightning? People ain't saying that's almighty an angel up there shooting golf, playing racquetball. That's God and the angel bowling. I'll rest my case. I'm Earl Pitts, Bible scholar. Amurica, Pitts on.
All right, anybody want to make a comment on Earl Pitts?
Earl Pitts.
No? All right, Earl Pitts, Bible scholar. That's God is up there bowling when you hear lightning. But he has a point. Wake up, America. And that's what we're talking about today. And I forgot also, I'm forgetting everything today. Because of the freeze, my daffodils that I was going to bring today are a little bedraggled there at the bottom. They were frozen and they're thawed out now, and their heads are leaning over. And I went ahead and kept the daffodils from 3 weeks ago. They're a little bedraggled too, so that's kind of a little indicator for our congregation. We're a little bedraggled, but we're still got our heads up. So, all right, joys and concerns. First on the list is always Ukraine. Nothing has improved. The only improvement I've heard is they did renew the agreement to ship grain out of Ukraine to Africa. The Russians did allow that to happen. So at least that part is, it was passed and they were shipping grain in there. The Russians are allowing them to continue to ship grain. Other than that, it is still a horrendous disaster for everybody involved. The Russian troops are being recruited from prisons and told if they serve 3 months on the front, then they are released up from their prison sentence, no matter what it was, whether it was murder or whatever. And they're being used, basically, you've heard the term cannon fodder. They just send these guys with no training into the trenches and send them over to the front, and they're being slaughtered by the hundreds, just hundreds and thousands of them. And then the Ukrainians are losing their lives to Russian bombs, missiles, guided missiles, drones. And that's not only the military, it's also the civilians are being killed right and left. For just no reason whatsoever, because one guy wants to say, put a feather in his cap and say, I took this property, I took this land, and saying it used to be our land and we want it back, which it's just like the agreement, the arguments between Israel and the Palestinians. They will argue back to the beginning of time whose land it is. But the idea is to try and live in peace, which we are still praying for. All right, anything else? Current disasters this week? I can't think of any. Oh, wait a minute, I have one I can show you. Let me recognize that.
The ski lift?
Bear Mountain ski lift. This is the ski lift on this side is what it looks like in the summertime. 30 or 40 feet is how high the lift is. This is how much snow they've had.
Wow.
The guy's standing at the top of the lift. 30 feet of snow.
Where is that, Tim?
Bear Mountain, California. And I have another slide which I forgot to put in. They have condominiums, like 3-story condominiums, and I don't think it's Bear Mountain, but it's one of the other ski resorts. They have a picture of the condominium with the trees behind it. It has another picture. The snow is 3 stories high. You cannot get out the front. You can't even see out the front of the condominiums. Now, I'm assuming there's nobody there in the wintertime, because these are like resort type places. But there are people who live year-round in California in the mountains, and they've been snowed in for almost 2 weeks or almost 3 weeks now. And they're having a terrible time getting to them because even the snow blowers can't blow it up 30 feet. So they're basically putting it in trucks and hauling it and dumping it and coming back, and that takes forever to do that with snow. Not to mention the fact that almost every week they get another river, I think it's called an atmospheric river, comes in from the Pacific Ocean and dumps more snow and more water. So California is having a terrible time with floods and excessive snow. The one bright spot is it's going to put a big dent in the drought. They actually have opened some of the reservoirs to let water out of the reservoirs because there's...
If they can direct us to the reservoirs.
If they can get it to the reservoirs, and that's the trouble. Part of it is running down the street and flooding people's houses. So, but at least part of it is going to the reservoirs, so it will help there. But that doesn't help the people in Arizona. And we've talked about the water shortage before. You may have seen, and we'll put that on, we'll light a candle for Utah and the Great Salt Lake. The Mormon Church has just donated, I think it was $30 million worth of water. In other words, the Mormon Church was there at the very beginning of the state of Utah. So they got rights to the water that came down out of the mountains. And that water has value. They use it for agriculture and irrigation. And that's what the Mormon Church has, a huge landownings and huge farm set situations. But they have donated the water to save the Great Salt Lake. Number one, it's a migratory byway, flyway stop arrow over for migratory birds heading from Mexico to Canada. If the Great Salt Lake dried up, they would have no place to stop and feed and rest on that tremendous migration. The other thing is, the Salt Lake now has already lost almost 75% of its surface area. The Salt Lake is a depository. It's one of those dead-end places where everything that comes down the river lands in the Salt Lake and stays there. And that includes, from the mining and the other things that have gone on in Utah, lots of heavy metals, mercury, cadmium, lead, metals that I can't even pronounce, have been in the water and held in suspension. When the water dries up, all that stuff settles out on the surface, when the wind blows, it turns into dust, and then it blows into Salt Lake City and coats everything in the city, including people's windshields, gets into their houses. You breathe it through the air. So there's a real danger, according to science, of people being poisoned by these heavy metals blowing around in the atmosphere. So they've talked actually about running tanker trucks on the Great Salt Lake bed just to keep the ground damp so the wind doesn't blow it up into dust. So they are facing a true catastrophe there if something isn't done. And interestingly enough, the church wants you to think, or maybe it's assumed that they're being very benevolent and charitable by giving $31 million to the Great Salt Lake. But actually the church is the founding thing in Salt Lake City and the heart of Salt Lake City. And if Salt Lake City was poisoned, it wouldn't be very good for the church. So they're actually doing it for their own benefit, but at least they admitted to do that. Okay, so that's Salt Lake. Anything else? Let me throw in a little bit. New Carlisle is having a problem. One of their women is having problems with her husband. He's a person who owns guns, as you've run all these stories before. So my wife is a little on the edgy side. If this guy decides to give his ex-wife or give his, in the process of divorced wife, a hard time, what may happen to the church? We think these things can never happen to us, never happen close to home. They can. These situations are all over the place, and everybody now has a gun, and it's almost impossible to take guns away from people, even if they make threats and even if there's a difficult situation. So I light a candle for New Carlisle and their continued safety. And you know, you get a protective order, keep your distance. That's just a piece of paper. It does no good whatsoever. So, right. And one final candle for those who are not here, maybe here in spirit. For those who have problems that they cannot deal with, please let us know. We will make every attempt to help you deal with your problems and to be in community with you. And you would be surprised how much it helps your problems to think about someone else's problems. If you're trying to help someone else, you're not worrying about yourself. So think of self-interest. All right, our message: wake up, America. Before the right co-opted the term and used it to describe everything from BlackRock. BlackRock is a conglomerate, a money investing arm, an investment bank. And BlackRock, as an investment bank, said they weren't going to invest in destructive practices. In other words, they don't invest in cigarettes, they don't invest in alcohol. And some people criticize any investment arm. Some states are saying they will not let their teachers' funds or their employee funds be invested in investment firms who do things for a moral reason. That's they're calling them woke investment funds, and they won't invest in woke investment funds. And that includes also Disney World. I'm sure you've heard of Disney World when Florida came up and DeSantis came up with the idea that LGBTQ was not to be, you can't say the word gay, you can't talk about gay. If kids are having trouble with their gender identity, they cannot talk to their teachers, they cannot talk to the school counselors. All that is prohibited in Florida. Disney said nothing for the first about 2 months that was going on, and finally the Disney employees implored the president, the CEO of Disney, to say something. So all he did was make a public statement that said Disney supports LGBTQ and transgender youth in their attempt to become accepted members of society. And for that, the state of Florida has revoked the charter that Disney had, and we talked about this last week. They want to take control of the Disney organization and take control of the Disney board, so Disney is not allowed to be pro-LGBTQ or pro-transgender. And I told you the little quirk that happened last week when they took away the operating authority of the Disney corporation over that little county that they run, which they actually run the county. They have the fire department, police department, the sanitation department, the street department. They run everything. When the county, when the state took that away and gave it to the actual county that it's in, they also gave that county the billions and billions of dollars in debt that Disney has accumulated. They decided that the taxpayers in that county were not real happy at being given a tax bill of billions and billions of dollars that they would have to pay for. So they've changed the charter adjustment a little bit, and they gave the debt back to Disney. So Disney can't control what they say or what they do as far as policies, but they are still responsible for the maintenance of the debt. So we'll have to see how that works out. All right, wokeism originally came from African American vernacular. It's something that the black community talked about in the 60s. And what it was broadly defined as is being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. And this person says, Americans who aren't suffering from Fox News-induced brain worms will still understand that to be its meaning. According to a recent USA Today poll, 56% of Americans surveyed say they think that being woke means to be informed, educated on, aware of social injustices. 39% of the people surveyed and 56% of the people who identified as Republicans, meanwhile, said it referred to be overly politically correct and police others. In other words, the cancel culture. So, some examples. We talked about ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. I mentioned that last week. When you register to vote, it goes into an electronic database that's shared between all 50 states. You are registered to vote in the state of Ohio, in the county of Darke, in the city of Greenville. That means if you go to Indiana or Illinois or Florida and register to vote, a little red flag pops up and says you're already registered to vote someplace else. You can't be in both places at the same time. That's what ERIC does. Frank LaRose, our Secretary of State, has just taken Ohio out of ERIC. They no longer will contribute to ERIC, and they no longer will look and see what ERIC has to say. This means that in Ohio, that you can come from Florida and register, and you can vote in Florida, and then you can come back to Ohio, or you can vote absentee in Ohio, and there's no way anyone will know about it. These are from the people who tell you that voting identity and voting safety is the most important thing. We have the most stringent photo ID laws of any of the states. You cannot vote unless you have a photo ID. It has to be from the Bureau of License, the License Bureau. It can't just be something you go down to CVS and get a picture. And even if it's not a driver's license, it's still a photo ID. So and what they've done is they've taken the license branches and they've centralized them. So there used to be, there was license branches 2 or 3 in every county, and every little town had a license branch. It's not that way anymore. There's 1 for each county. If you have a hard time getting there, if you're in a nursing home and don't drive, how are you supposed to get your photo ID so you can vote? It's a problem and they say the ID is free, but they don't tell you that it's free to get there. So that's going to be it's one of the combinations and one of the problems with wokeism. In another case, an author named Jodi Picoult had one of her best-selling books banned from a Florida library because a parent objected to her telling a story of the Holocaust. The Storyteller is a novel about the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and fascism in Germany. It was a strange irony that they wanted this particular book removed because it was like history repeating itself. The story of book banning in Germany being told in a book in Florida was banned by the people in Florida. So the story of book banning in another country was banned in this country. The feeling and the stuff we thought we left behind is rearing its ugly head, and it's happening a lot more. She went on to recite a recent hearing about the COVID-19 crisis and how it was handled, that it welcomed a witness named Nicholas Wade, who penned a book called A Troublesome Inheritance. I mentioned this also last week. This was a Jim Jordan oversight committee, and this was a witness that was there. This author wrote a book called A Troublesome Inheritance, and it wrote a review that the New Republic wrote a review that describes it as a book which argues, among other things, that Jews possess a genetic adaptation to capitalism. This is a person who says and promulgates in the 21st century that the reason Jews are so successful as business people is because they have a gene that makes them business people, that makes them successful at that. We all know, and I think we've talked about this before, the reason Jews are primarily in business is because when the Jewish pogroms and the Jewish justice started in the 1500s, 1400s, 1300s, Jews were not allowed to be farmers. They were not allowed to be merchants. They were not allowed to be grain millers. They were prescribed from being any of the more occupations that were considered acceptable, and they were told in the 13, 14, 1500s business was considered a lower echelon job, something that nobody should be doing, something that was, you got your hands dirty dealing with money. So the Jews were pushed into being the business people, and they made a success out of it. And now this person, who is a witness for Jim Jordan's committee, is saying that the reason they're successful is not because they were pushed into business and told to be in business. It was because they have a gene that makes them good at business. This is a complete misunderstanding of genealogy, a complete misunderstanding of inheritance. All right, he's also famous for writing a book claiming that the Jewish people are genetically involved and biologically programmed to love money. He actually said that. This was the expert they brought in to testify on the science of COVID. Wasn't even testifying about anything else, he was testifying about COVID. All right, another one we ran across was the Sarasota Hospital group. The Sarasota Hospital is a public hospital, serves the entire county, and is a large major metropolitan hospital. Their board meetings are now, used to be sleepy little things with maybe 10 people there, including the board members. Now they're 100, they have overflow crowds, like 200 and 300 people. They're being disrupted by activists who complain about COVID-19 treatment. They complain the hospital is not dispensing ivermectin to people in the hospital who want ivermectin. And they're disrupting the board, and there are being death threats, and they have to have the police there. The funny thing about this is, there is, if I can find the guy's name somewhere in here, I'll find it. There is a guy who was against, or who used ivermectin for almost 20 years, took a daily dose, and he's one of these people who pushed ivermectin as a cure for COVID-19 and as a cure for daily living, just to make you healthier. He died last year from a cardiomyopathy, from his heart basically grew so large that it couldn't actually effectively pump. Having a large heart is not always a good thing. It might be metaphorically a good thing, but in real physical life, having an enlarged heart is a dangerous thing that will eventually kill you. Ivermectin, that is one of the side effects of ivermectin. It grows the heart muscle, it enlarges the heart muscle. So this guy who was pushing to have ivermectin given to other people in the hospital was killed by ivermectin. This is a scientific fact by the autopsy. Nobody pays any attention to this. None of these people do, at least. All right, another thing that's happened, hundreds of anti-Semitic flyers have been dumped all over West Palm Beach, and that's where a group of Eric Trump and his Hitler plan, his Hitler-loving pals are headed. This person was ticketed for littering. These are the same people, and including the guy who's with Eric Trump, is saying that the people who did 9/11 were Jews. This is one of the stories that's being passed along in the underground, that the Jewish people are responsible for the World Trade Center destruction on 9/11. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind, in any person who looks at the facts in mind, who the occupants of the airplane and who sees control of the two airplanes that crashed into the World Trade Center? Almost 90% of them were from Saudi Arabia, which has escaped control. But yet this person says it was a conspiracy all planned by the Jews. So that's how crazy this thing is. So what we get down to is there's a difference between wokeism and wokeness. That's what we want to talk about. Wokeism, or let's do wokeness first. Wokeness is an aware of other isms. Wokeness is an awareness of isms. Racism, ageism, ableism, sexism, classism, gingerism, and religionism. So let's go through those. Racism, we all know what that is. If you don't like people because of the color of their skin or because they have a big hook nose and they're good at business, you are a racist. That's good to be aware that somebody is a racist and that you want to be aware of racism so you don't become a racist, even by telling jokes that you think are innocuous, telling jokes that you think everybody likes, but tend to be racist jokes. Ageism. That is when you are prejudiced against people because of age. Either they're so young that you don't believe they have rights or they have abilities, or they're too old. The more common one is you're too old to do the job, and that's called ageism. Ableism. We've all seen ableism. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't do this job. If you have any kind of a physical handicap, then you can't do these jobs. It's turned out that many people who are handicapped are more than able to do many, many jobs, and that's what ableism is trying to fight. That's why you have the little curb things on the corner of the streets, so a wheelchair can get up and down into the street, across the street, and get up onto the other curb. Can you imagine what it used to be like when there was a curb there and you were in a wheelchair? You were basically trapped. I mean, there's nothing you could do. And there's still stories of the guy who wanted to speak at the city council meeting, and they had to lift his wheelchair up onto the podium, up on the platform so he could speak. Well, he was in an electric wheelchair that weighed like 300 pounds, so they couldn't do that. So they lifted him up onto the floor, and he crawled to the podium, and they lifted him up and sat him in a chair so he could speak. In this country, the civilization that we have, there is no reason for that. So there is a reason, and that reason is ableism. Sexism, we all know sexism. Women can't do what men can do, and actually I can give you a personal example. It goes both ways. Prejudice can be of any kind. I became a nurse like 20 years ago. It was very unusual for males to be nurses in those days. So there was all kinds of problems that I faced with that. The difference is when you're a man as a nurse, you're in real demand, because when there's a big person that weighs 300 pounds is falling out of their wheelchair on the floor, they don't call the little 90-pound blonde, they call the 200-pound big guy to come pick them up and screw your back up. Classism, people are prejudiced against people because of their class. If you come from the wrong side of the tracks, you don't have the right education, then you can't get this job, or you can't be accepted in this house, or you can't be accepted in this fraternity, whatever. That is classism. Gingerism, that was a new one. You don't see it in the United States, but does anybody know what gingerism is? It's an English thing. For some reason, the English are prejudiced against red-headed people, which I have no idea where that comes from. And prejudice is a pretty bizarre thing anyway, because prejudice is founded on maybe a little thumbnail of fact that came from somewhere, and then people extrapolate it. Let's take racism, for example. My wife criticizes me for because I'll tell jokes, off-color jokes occasionally, but when we drive down to Dayton and are driving down Salem Avenue, she makes sure all the doors are locked on the car. Now that basically is racism, because you're going through this neighborhood and you're afraid of black people, you're locking all the doors. But there is an actual fact for that, because the crime rate in Salem Avenue is extremely high, and you don't want to stop at a stoplight with your doors open and have somebody open your door and get in your car. So there's a difference between stereotypes and reality, and that is the hard part with wokeism or wokist, is to divide that between what is real, what makes sense, and what is a stereotype, and what is being a racist. And it's hard sometimes to judge in the middle of that. That's what being aware has to do with. And then religionism, it used to be a lot worse. When the Irish came and the Catholics came, there used to be prejudice. There used to be signs that they wouldn't hire Irish, they wouldn't hire Catholics. When the Chinese came, and then they had the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Confucianism, there used to be prejudice against that. And every religion has that internal conflict between different branches of Protestantism. The Lutherans don't like the Methodists, or the Methodists say there's something wrong with the Anglicans. There's always isms that go on. And so that is what wokeism is. Wokeism is the awareness mutates into self-righteous indignation. Closed-minded, militant, they belittle the people they don't like, all the off-putting things we shy away from. That wokeness is being aware of what these things are and trying to deal with them in a rational manner, trying to make sure that you're not being prejudiced yourself. Wokeism is just another ism. It's when, and this can happen, you can be someone who is a left-leaning liberal, Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden you can become prejudiced against white people, and we've seen examples of that. You can become prejudiced against people who are conservative voters, and conservative voters can be real people with real problems, and they can be real people who are helpful and good people and good citizens. And just because they vote conservative doesn't mean that all the things you hear about conservatives are bad about each one. So that's the hard part, is figuring out which one is which. There's a little interesting quote from Nietzsche, which I liked, and that applies to what we're talking about. When fighting monsters, beware that you don't become a monster. When fighting monsters, beware that you do not become a monster. And a good example of that, and the best one that I can think of, is the state of Israel suffered from the Holocaust. The state of Israel was formed in the middle of Palestine, in the middle of the Middle East, against all kinds of opposition from all the Arab countries surrounding it. They fought wars to defend themselves. Israel was one of the primary and one of the few democracies in the Middle East, one of the few states that supported the right to vote and the independence of its people. What is happening in Israel today? They have elected a super conservative government. There are people in the government as ministers who are saying the Palestinians should be excluded, should be thrown out of Jerusalem. They've built a wall between Jerusalem and, or the West Bank of Jerusalem and the state of Israel to keep people out. It is looking more and more, some people compare it to the Berlin Wall, some people compare it to South Africa and apartheid. There used to be, and there are still, Arab citizens of Israel who have the right to vote in Israel. There are legitimate ministers in the Israeli government who want to take that right away from these people. Be careful when you are fighting monsters that you do not become a monster. Israel is basically turning into a totalitarian, non-democratic state that wants to snuff out the rights and existence of the Palestinians. They want to exclude the Palestinians from the city of Jerusalem. All right, and that's the one thing about wokeness, is what they think is black, brown, red, yellow people are not dumber than white people. Some of them, this is a guy who uses the wokeness, and this is what DeSantis is doing in Florida. They turn this in an interesting way that they control the language. He says black, brown, red, yellow people are not dumber than white people. Some of my favorite brainy individuals could never be mistaken for a white supremacist. Moreover, of all the minorities I've known and befriended during my lifetime, not a single one has ever expressed any belief that whitey is out on the hunt for them, rigging everything from math to English. I'm the type to specifically ask questions like, with all the talk of racism everywhere, do you feel as though your life is consumed by white folks oppressing you at every turn? He's never received an answer yes to that question from his friends, but his friends are all of that persuasion, that conservative persuasion. Just because you're black does not mean, as a stereotype, that you're a liberal. There are many blacks who are very conservative, and we all know that part of the conservatism is the black community tends to be fairly religious, and religious people tend to be more conservative in general. There is a tremendous problem in the black community with LGBTQ. Homosexuality is not accepted in the black community. It is very difficult for black homosexuals to gain acceptance in their own community. So, what he says is, I am an American, I have no skin color worthy of no particular geographical heritage I claim as my own. My race is called freedom, my people come in every hue. I will stand with my brothers and sisters of all skin hues against every tyranny known to man. I will not back down, I refuse to be afraid. I am an American, the most fearsome ethnicity ever devised. There is your clue. I am an American, the most fearsome ethnicity ever devised. If you find someone who is extremely proud and extremely militant, that is a clue to me that you're talking to someone who might be against wokeism, who might be against being woke. That is what woke is. To be woke is to be aware that you are prejudiced against people, and the people who tell you they're not prejudiced, I have friends who are black, and then they'll tell you an off-color joke, or they will tell you they will not support food supplies, SNAP benefits for poor people. They will talk about welfare queens and welfare Cadillacs. There's a cloud, a little mist of covering where they say they're not prejudiced, and the more they say they're not prejudiced, the more prejudiced they sound. Okay. In the case of woke and wokeness, conservatives are undermining a positive idea with a derisive, figurative language. Consider a converse example in which Republicans advance the ugly principle through positive framing: waterboarding. Waterboarding is described as enhanced interrogation, and that was repeated by the press corps. However, if you actually describe what's involved in waterboarding, making a person temporarily experience drowning, Americans respond with repulsion. Conservatives know this, so they choose to be evasive. Enhanced interrogation is more palatable than torture and simulated drowning. And that is where we get into what is the enemy of being woke. When they're against being woke, they're against awareness, and that awareness is how language is used, and that is the master. We talked about the person who was with Ronald Reagan, whose name escapes me right now, who changed, remember the ad, Willie Horton, where they showed the prison bars and the black guy and said he was let out of prison early because of Dukakis's signature. All that was all emphasis to scare people. Some black guy's getting out of prison and he's going to assault you and rape your wife and beat up your kids and steal your money. That was on the TV over and over and over again. That is nothing but racism. It's pure and simple racism, but it's put up and sold as a defense of liberty, or it's put up and sold as we want to keep you safe. The same things are going on now. There is a big push. There is what they call bail reform. When people are arrested for whatever the reason and given bail, if you have money, you can bail yourself out for a couple $100s. If you have no money, then you spend the rest of your time until there's a hearing in jail. If you're in jail, you can't work. If you can't work, you get fired from your job. It's a vicious circle that if you don't have money, you can't get money. And if you can't get money, you can't get out of jail, so you can go back to work and get money. So there's been a big push to reform bail for nonviolent crimes. There should be no bail. You should be booked in, listed, given a court date, and then set loose. There's a big push, a conservative push against that, and the whole thing is saying that you are in danger from these people. The judge knows and the court system knows who's a violent offender and who's not a violent offender. If you've been arrested for holding a marijuana joint or whatever, you're not going to go out and rob somebody or beat somebody up. You should not be held in jail for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 3 months because you can't afford a couple $100s for bail money. So that's what they're using the language for. In this case, underlying denotation, the awareness of social injustice is good, where the connotations are unfortunately negative. As they did with enhanced interrogation, conservatives are using figurative language to obscure deeper principles and create a fog of feeling rather than reason. This is the hallmark If someone is appealing to you how you feel and not how you think, that's telling you that they're appealing to your, what they call the reptilian brain, your automatic response. And many times your automatic emotional response is not the rational, is not the correct response. It is a purely emotional response of fear. And fear is what drives people to vote and do things that they probably shouldn't do and wouldn't do if they thought about them. Okay, we're running out of time here. Once again, I blabbed on too much. So we may have to come back to this, because the words like liberal used to have a good meaning. Now it's called libtard. People are accused of being liberal like it's some kind of an insult. Liberal means to be aware of what's going on in the world and try and make the world a better place. There is nothing wrong with trying to make the world a better place. Okay, questions, comments? We'll probably come back to this, and again, let's see, I think I had it. According to liberal morality, if you commit a crime yourself, it is someone else's fault. But if you are guilty of things that happened hundreds of years ago, before you were born, then you're guilty of that. This is the common conservative approach, and this is what they tell you. A conservative will say, according to liberals, if you commit a crime yourself, if you're a criminal, it's because of your background, it's because of your parents, because you didn't have an education, it's because you didn't have a job, it's because you were using drugs, it's not your fault. In other words, that's the reason that people give excuses for why crimes are committed, and there is a reason for that. It's understandable that some people grew up in a bad background, some people are brain damaged. You don't execute people who are subpar mentality because they killed someone in a fit of rage which they couldn't control. So that's used as a cudgel to beat up liberals. But what the opposite of that is, then they say, the conservatives will say, if you're a liberal, then you're telling people you're guilty of the crimes your ancestors committed. In other words, this is always used with racism. Because the white population has kept the black population in check for hundreds of years in the United States, can't use the same water fountains, can't use the same restrooms, can't vote, can't sit in the front of the bus. Then they're trying to say, and we're trying to make that right. That's what the corrective action is for, is to try and make up for those wrongs that people have suffered. They're saying that is a ill-conceived and bad judgment, because you're trying to be held guilty for something that your parents did. If you didn't do it, then you're not guilty of it. And we can discuss that if people have a question on that. Okay, now we're done for what we're going to do here. Comments, questions? All right, offering. As usual, if you need something, take something out if you can to help us with the light and work of the church, put something in.
The doxology is missing one line up there.
Ooh, wonder where that was. Very appropriate. We have a card to sign for Margaret and Patrick. We'll put that on the table up there. We have all kinds of donuts and cookies and coffee. Our Extinguishing the Chalice, The World is Too Beautiful by Eric Williams. The world is too beautiful to be praised by only one voice. May you have the courage to sing your part. The world is too broken to be healed by only one set of hands. May you have the courage to use your gifts. May you go in peace. Very nice. Thank you.
You didn't have between the years today.
What's that?
You didn't have between.
Oh, I
the
didn't have,
years.
yeah, I didn't have, I was kind of, this has been a bad week, lots of stuff going on. You can see by the last slide there, U.S. and the Holocaust, that's the Ken Burns, and I've got all 3 of those from the library. We probably won't do all 3 of them because that would be like 2 hours worth of video, but we'll do as much as anybody wants to see.
I got it.